Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Cleveland Guardians. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins continue their losing streak. That's right. No sausage, no happiness, no celebration. Their losing streak, losing 6 in a row now. The last 3 here in this Guardian series, Dan. What is the deal? Hot, cold? I mean, it's not like lukewarm, Dan. This team has never been room temperature in its life.
And yet that sausage is. Did they throw away the sausage?
I would understand it, Dan, if that's what's caused this losing streak, because something clearly has taken place.
Yeah, I think they need to get rid of it, get something else. They lost 5 in a row earlier, then they won 12 in a row, and then they lost 6 in a row. Now 3 to the Guardians after 3 to the Yankees. They are a mediocre team. I think this is what mediocre teams can be in the most extreme way, where they beat the bad teams and they lose to the good teams, and they get no help from the umps.
Well, we will try, Dan, to talk about this series as much as possible, but we do have a couple of extracurricular items to discuss here. So first off, and I guess this is connected, I like the Cleveland City Connect jerseys. The big CLE across the front, I think they're pretty cool. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they look close enough to Guardians jerseys that I feel like they make sense. Sometimes these City Connect jerseys are like totally different colors that I don't associate with these teams. It's kind of like Australia. Their national colors are green and yellow on their soccer team, but like their flag is red, white, and blue. It's that kind of stuff that throws me off.
Okay, sure.
I know you're not a
Dan.
soccer guy, so you don't think about that.
All
But every time I see the
like
Australian...
onions.
But come on, you've never seen the Australian national soccer team play?
I guess I would not have been able to tell you, Dan, what color their jerseys were. No, that would not be something that I would have been able to even guess. That being said, the only thing I don't like about those jerseys is they have the ad patch, the marathon patch. And like these City Connect jerseys, because they're supposed to be this limited edition, like special prints and things like that, I hate that they have this stupid ad patch on them, Dan.
They got to pay for baseball somehow, David, and maybe Cleveland's got a better TV package than the Twins do. I had one other detail. So on Friday night, I was channeling my inner Corey Provis. I'm at my son's soccer game, and I thought, you know what? Here's a corner kick. Just so you know, like corner kicks are often, they lead to scoring chances in soccer. And so, I just had a feeling that something good was going to happen. And so I got my phone out and I was able to capture my son's goal on camera, which as a parent of a child in youth sports, that's gold right there. Like you get so many dad points if you can get a goal on camera. And it was great. Proud dad moment.
No, you sent me the highlight, Dan. I mean, I don't know, again, what Nokia 90s phone that you recorded this on, but it was this pixelated thing. But I could tell that your boy had scored a goal based on the cheering. But so congrats to your son. Big moment. Love to see it, Dan.
All right, well, with that, let's go to the series recap.
Series recap.
There was one good thing that happened in the top of the third. Alex Kirilloff hit a home run. He pulled it, no less. He's usually one of those opposite field lefties. Ends the team's 28-inning scoreless streak, which was one shy of the team's all-time record, and it also ended Kirilloff's 1-for-29 streak. I thought this was going to bode well for the series.
It's a nice thought, Dan, that was going to lead to good things, but clearly it didn't. Twins grounded to double plays in each of the first 3 innings. The game sort of sails along. SWR, Dan, deserves a lot of credit. He threw the ball very well. He goes 5 1/3, 2 strikeouts, only 1 earned run, and then gives way to the bullpen. Okert comes in, we'll talk about this a little bit later, and gives up another run. But really, it's the 6th inning in general that we need to spend a little bit of time discussing.
In the bottom of the 6th, we get a unique play where the Guardians challenge, I'm going to say offsides. Correa was apparently... He misunderstood the rule where he thought that it was the middle of the base was the imaginary line that you could not cross. So he couldn't be lined up on the first base side of that. But it turns out it's the edge of the base. And this was only the 5th time since baseball instituted this rule last year that this has been challenged, and it nullified an out. And I guess what you can do in that situation is that the team can either take the result of the play, which obviously they didn't want, or it's an automatic ball. And this leads to further trouble.
Yeah, it doesn't end well here. So infield in actually works though, Dan. I know that you're always opposed to infield in, but
always.
It works here. Julian gets the runner at home, but it doesn't much matter because David Fry comes in and he hits a 2-run homer, making it 2-1 Cleveland on an 0-2 count nonetheless, Dan.
The super frustrating thing about this whole series was that the Twins would seemingly make a great play And then Cleveland would just hit a home run and totally undo it.
It didn't just feel that way, Dan. That's just how it was. It just happened. If you look at the box score, that's exactly what took place.
So the Guardians do take a 2-1 lead there. And then in the top of the 8th, Castro is called out on strikes on a pitch well outside. This happened at least 3 times by my count. And we'll talk a little bit more about the top of the 8th. When Kyle Farmer comes in, pinches, I thought this was a good call. I'll talk about that later. He ties the game up with an RBI double. But then Margot pinches for Larnach. Why are we doing this?
It's a silly way to manage, Dan. But he took a walk. So I guess he can only be so criticized for making this move, Rocco, that is. But yeah, Margot comes in and takes a walk, which I think is really best case scenario when Margot's at the plate, Dan.
Well, and then bottom of the 8th, Jeffers throws out Andres Jimenez, stealing second. So things are looking pretty good. The Twins actually win that on review. And then we'll come back to the Ramirez home run later. And then we get into the top of the 9th. Emmanuel Clase comes in. Man, Emmanuel Clase, it's so frustrating to see him on the mound. He seems to be so good against the Twins. Correa works a 9-pitch at bat, but then a low ball, clearly low, was called strike 3. That was, again, we referenced this, the 3rd terrible call by the ump. And so that ends up ending the game here. It's 3-2, and the Guardians win a game that was very winnable for the Twins.
Very winnable indeed, Dan, and really the most winnable of the series now in hindsight. You have a note here about Stephen Okert's ERA is only 3.77, but he's let 1,000 inherited runners score. Is that right?
It's just crazy. Like, this is such an important stat that's not a real stat, or at least it doesn't factor into somebody's ERA, and I get why, but man, every time it seems like, and it's close to like 75% of his inherited runners score. So, and that was the Fry home run in the bottom of the 6th. It's just that whenever Stephen Okert comes into the game, it feels like something bad happens.
Yeah, again, we'll talk more about Okert a little bit later, but game 2, Dan, this one, if you thought game 1 was heartbreaking and frustrating and you were mad at the umps because of all the terrible calls, game 2 was worse, Dan. Twins lose this one 11-4, but really, they lost this 11-0. Cleveland had the equipment managers playing in the field for the top of the 9th, Dan, against the Twins.
I mean, heck, Willie Castro was pitching at the end of this
That's
game.
what I'm saying.
The best pitcher. He was the only Twins pitcher to not give up a run in this game. He even recorded a 1-2-3 inning. But yeah, this tracks back to the very beginning. The bottom of the 1st, it's Jose Ramirez at it again. Homers at the end of a 12-pitch at-bat against Bailey Ober. Puts the Guardians up 2-0. The Guardians get a couple more in the 3rd on a Ramirez double, and then a Josh Naylor sac fly. It just seemed like those guys were always getting hits. In fact, the top 3 of the Guardians lineup in this game, Tyler Freeman, Andres Jimenez, and Ramirez, went 10 for 14 with 8 RBI. Bottom of the 4th and the 5th, the Guardians add 1 in the 4th, 2 more in the 5th, so it's 7-0. And that's pretty much all pinned. Most of that is pinned on Bailey Ober, who only gives him 4 innings, 8 hits, 5 earned runs, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts, and 91 pitches. At least he gave him 4 innings in this one.
I don't understand Bailey Ober exactly, Dan, because he's been lights out. He has been phenomenal since his first start of the season against the Royals. He's pitched against some good teams, Dan. Now he goes up against Cleveland and he starts giving up a ton more hits. I have to think that there's something about divisional games here, that you're more familiar with those pitchers. Don't you think there's something to be said about the pitchers seeing him so well on just these sort of random games? Is he just off every 6th start or something like that? Or is there something more?
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
I am a little stitious about this.
It seems that way. I don't know. Maybe it was where he was holding his glove. You know, like was it down by his belt once and up by his chest, kind of like Chris Paddack?
No, I watched, Dan. No, and okay, here's the thing. I've never really been a guy who looked for that sort of thing. Like, unless somebody told me, I don't think had I watched the replay of Paddack tipping his pitches to the Yankees, I don't think had nobody said, like, I should be looking for him tipping pitches, I wouldn't have noticed it. Sure. Like, and I'm not, I didn't play ball at any sort of real level growing up. I played T-ball in Little League and whatnot, but, like, that was not something that I would have spotted, I don't think, unless somebody told me to look for it. And so, but now, it's like in my mind, especially when one of our pitchers is just getting absolutely decimated on the mound.
Well, and then from there, Funderburg gives up a couple earned runs. Jay Jackson, in what turns out to be his final appearance with the Twins, gives up 3 earned runs in 1 inning. We talked about Castro pitching the end. The Twins do get 4 runs in the top of the 9th with RBIs for Buxton and Farmer. They got 1 more run on an error, but yeah, that makes the 11-4 result. I don't know. I guess it was nice to get the offense going a little bit.
It was nice to see Buxton with some offensive production, though, sort of get things flowing again after coming back after the IL stint.
Yeah, we should notice that it was Martin who was optioned down, and then after Jay Jackson was DFA'd officially on Sunday, Caleb Bushley came back. And so we'll see. We haven't really seen much out of him this year. We'll see if they need him going forward. But it's sad to say goodbye to Jay Jackson just because, he's a guy who finally stuck on a roster. But as it turned out, he wasn't effective. He had an ERA over 6, and so the Twins are cutting bait.
Yeah, there may be a reason, Dan, why he hadn't broken camp with an MLB roster. But anyway, let's go to game 3. This one's absolutely heartbreaking, Dan. The Twins lose this one 5-2, but it was 2-2 headed into the bottom of the 9th.
Yeah, it starts with, ominously enough, in the bottom of the 1st, the Guardians have a Tyler Freeman Freeman single, and then a home run by Andres Jimenez. Again, the top of that lineup just battering the Twins. But after that, Paddack really settled down. 8 innings, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, no walks, 6 strikeouts, 100 pitches. Dueled very admirably by Tanner Bybee, who has 7 innings pitched, 4 hits. The 1 earned run is just a Miranda home run early, and then 8 strikeouts. Twins did have their chances. They were 0 for 8 with runners in scoring position, but they are able to finally score one more run in the top of the 9th. This is when, with 2 outs, Ryan Jeffers, this is against Clase A as well. Jeffers is hit by a pitch. Buxton comes in and pinch runs. Castro reaches on a fielder's choice, which was a play that was reviewed. It was ultimately upheld in the Twins' favor. And then there's a weird play where Alex Kirilloff grounds out to first. He's down 2 strikes, and so you think this is probably the end of the game. But Clase covering first, I guess he was covering it, so we can't call it a Jorge Alcala moment. But Clase drops the ball from Josh Naylor.
Shots fired, Dan Thompson. You've always been an Alcala guy, too.
I have been, but Rocco, it's like Rocco's kind of seeping into my brain, right? So it's a weird play, and then the Guardians try to get Buxton, who's kind of rounded third at this point, but they throw behind him, and Buxton is so fast, he's able to score the tying run. Now, unfortunately, the Twins aren't able to get anything more in the inning, so they go into the bottom of the 9th, and it's 2-2. But then, we're going to talk more about this a little bit later. Ultimately, the Guardians score 3 runs, and it's 5-2, and just like that, the Guardians have swept the Twins, and they now have a 5.5 game lead in the Central. Guardians have their 30th win. They're 30-17. The Royals are a game and a half back, 29-19, and then the Twins all the way back now in third at 24-22. And at this point, when we're recording here, the Tigers are still playing, but they're only a half game back of the Twins here at 23-22. With the White Sox, a pretty distant 5th still, 14-33.
It's crazy to me that they're 2 games above 500, Dan, and the Twins are 5.5 back right now. Like, that doesn't seem to be where we should be mid-May. If you're 2 games above 500, I mean, it can happen. And honestly, I do not think this Guardians team is as good as the Twins made them look this particular series. I do not think they're that good. I got into it with a couple of guys on Cleveland Twitter. Turns out they're not very fun people to interact with. Who knew? I didn't know, Dan. I didn't know. I was annoyed with a lot of the calls in game 1. The umping was absolutely terrible. The umpire scorecard showed that Cleveland had been given enough favor overall to win the game and then some. So to me, that doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing to point out, Dan. Like, it's okay if you want to be upset, but my favorite thing to do, Dan, is when I see someone who's criticizing us for criticizing the umps, is it doesn't take long. I promise, Dan. Click on one of their profiles. Within 2 or 3 tweets, you'll find them complaining about the umps, and then it's all square. No problem.
It's one of those truisms in life against everybody complains about the umpires.
That's fine. If you want to complain about the ump, especially when objectively he was terrible,
sure,
you have a right to complain. I'm not going to criticize you for saying that, hey, this ump was bad, this particular outing.
No, that makes sense, and that's what I like about the ump scorecard, right? It kind of levels the playing field for all of us, right? I love that follow. If you're not following them on X, we suggest you give them a follow. Well, we will talk more about the umpiring in one of the segments, but let's go on here to Puckett's Picks Winner.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks Winner.
I'm surprised you didn't want to start with the segment before the recap, Dan, just so you could talk about your great victory here with Max Kepler.
I was excited that Kepler had that double late in Game 3 that allowed me to claim a victory here. I get the win with Kepler with 3 points. Feels a lot like your win last week. You picked Ryan Jeffers, who had an all-time low of the season so far, -6. He grounded into like 4 double plays or something. It was pretty dreadful. Hogue's got a point out of Larnach, and the listeners got -2 out of Correa. Now, there was a 3-way tie for the team high between, go figure, Jose Miranda, Alex Kirilloff, and Kyle Farmer with 5. So I don't get the bonus point. But David, I'm catching up here. That was a much needed win, I'll say.
Yeah, so I'm still currently in the lead with 7, followed by Hogues at 4.5, then Dan now in third at 3.5, and the listeners only at 2, which goes to show, Dan, picking first isn't an automatic victory in this Puckett's Picks game.
No, certainly not when you have 4 players. And I think and one nice thing is that you're not running away with this. You're only twice as many points as me. I could make that up in just 3 series.
I like that you have the same approach we have about this Twins team, Dan. Yes, always optimistic, thinking we're not that far behind.
All right, let's go on here. Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
I have to give it to a pitcher. I looked around this roster. I couldn't really find a position player who stood out. I'm going with the Sheriff, Chris Paddack. What a start that he gave them. Just the fact that he gave them 8 innings is always good, right? You always want your starter to go. And they were efficient 8 innings. 100 pitches across 8. That's awesome.
Yeah, a great outing from Paddack and a great bounce back outing after absolutely getting destroyed on the mound by the New York Yankees, Dan.
Did you have a beast? I don't see anything in your box here.
I was too embarrassed to write it down, Dan. I'm going to go with Manny Margot. As you can see, big spot in game 1, as we mentioned. Margot comes to the plate pinching for Larnach, and he takes a walk. Well done. No errors recorded unpromoted, played the outfield like an absolute champion in game 2, Dan, and goes 3 for 4. What do you know? Manny Margot. Why is anybody ever criticizing him, Dan? He should be playing so much more baseball for this team.
You couldn't even write his name down? That's how badly you felt about picking him?
It's the first time I've picked on him, and I've picked on him a lot in different ways throughout the season, Dan, so I feel bad about picking him for the beast. So I feel a little bit hypocritical here.
Well, so for my bench, I actually had to go with Johan Duran. He picked up 2 losses in this series, and I get that, it's a tie game in game 3, but gosh, he wasn't locking down this lineup, and hopefully it's just a blip. I get that, sometimes closers get hit, but when Emmanuel Clase is so good on the other side, it just frustrates me to see that our flamethrower can't keep up.
Don't forget to bring a towel.
Do you think it's because he was too sweaty, Dan, and he just couldn't get a hold of the ball? Like, remember last season he had a towel with him out on the mound? Maybe that's the issue here.
Was it hot in Cleveland? I didn't even check the temperature.
It was really warm here this weekend, so I assume it was warm in Cleveland.
Maybe it was. Anyway, who do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to give it to Jeffers, my Puckett's picks, because he got me -6, Dan. That's the real reason I'm choosing him. No, but he went 1 for 8 with 4 Ks, including in game 1 particularly. He left 3 guys on base, and he came up in some big spots. It really annoyed me that the announcers were like, oh man, they really don't want Jeffers to come up to the plate. Why not? Why not? Like, he can hit a solo home run when the game doesn't matter anymore. Like, that's what all he's good for as of late.
Well, on we go to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
We both have thoughts for Rocco in game 1. I'm a little bit more negative, but chronologically, I should go first. So game 1, bottom 6. This is when SWR comes out. At this point, it's a 1-0 Twins lead. SWR gets an out, and then he comes out, and Rocco brings in Steven Okert. And Dan, remember Sergio Romo? And remember how he was like super excitable on the mound and always pumped up and loved getting those outs? And he only threw 1 pitch, right? Like a slider that was had just enough movement to play at the major league level. Steven Okert is that, but he's like Wonder Bread. He's very white. He's not very energetic or charismatic on the mound. And he's not the guy I want to see coming in when the games actually matter. He doesn't have the stuff. There's lots of other options for Rocco to go to in that moment. Steven Okert is not the guy.
Ogres are like onions.
Wonder Bread?
I was comparing a reliever who throws sliders to a reliever who throws sliders. How is that?
You talked about
ogres are
Wonder
like
Bread
onions?
too in there. I was just, that was the other thing that I was confused about.
Oh, I see. So you were taking a metaphor within my metaphor that I used to that was more of a description, Dan. No, Steven Okert is actually Wonder Bread.
Well, Okert is about as unsatisfying to me as Wonder Bread anyway. He's got 5 blown saves, which you get a blown save even if it's not the 9th inning, right? Anytime you come in, your team has a lead, and then they don't when you leave, that's considered a blown save. So yeah, 5 already. That goes back to what we're talking about with this ERA. It doesn't really show how bad he's been.
Yeah, but Rocco loves using him, Dan. So what do you have for Rocco? It looks like you're giving Rocco some kudos here, Dan, for a team that just lost 6 in a row.
Well, I do have to give Rocco his due. So this was a spot where Tim Herron comes in, and he's a lefty, and he's very good against lefties, like an under 100 batting average against lefties. And so Rocco pulls Julian, brings in Farmer, and then Farmer gets an RBI double. So this worked out here. And I did like that it was the 8th, and it wasn't the 6th or the 5th or the 4th or the 3rd or even the 2nd sometime that we've seen Rocco do a move like this. So I thought this was a proper use of the lefty-righty switch.
Do you think that Farmer could find himself with more playing time? Miranda's been okay, right? And Julian, though, has struggled. You do wonder, even without the matchups, though, Rocco's been playing Julian more. I wonder if Farmer might get a little bit more time at second base to help Julian get some time to get right.
Maybe, but it seems like Julian is kind of in that spot, kind of like Kirilloff is, where it takes a whole lot for Rocco to not trust him. I think he just sees Farmer as the backup second baseman who will come in against lefties.
Maybe. I don't know. I guess I think that Farmer should either get more playing time or get no playing time. I just think that he could be utilized more, especially for a team that needs a little bit of spark, and for a guy who everybody talks up as a really good clubhouse guy. It would be good, I think, for team morale to him to have a positive impact on the actual game on the field.
Well, and I hope he turns it around. They're paying him $6 million. Let's move on here. We got a little bit more to say about Game 1, actually, in the Minnesota Moment.
Minnesota Moment.
Yeah, so it's got to be Game 1, bottom 8 for me when Ramirez hits this game-winning home run off Duran. And it sort of summarizes the way that umping went in Game 1, Dan, which, again, huge favor given to Cleveland during this outing. But Duran, in this specific instance, Dan, he threw 2 strikes that were both called balls. Then he threw a 3rd strike. Then he had to throw a 4th strike, and that's the one that Ramirez hit out. And everybody's saying, oh, they were close pitches. They were borderline close pitches. It wasn't like, oh, they just nicked the zone. Like, no, it was on the line at worst, Dan. You can go see it. It's on our Twitter feed. You can see. I just think it really encapsulated how Twins fans felt, especially about game one, just feeling like everything was working against this baseball team.
It's brutal, though. Jose Ramirez seems like he is always getting hits against the Twins, and he did. He was working long at bats, and it was exactly what we saw there. I'm going to go in the bottom of the ninth of game three, which, in my heart, when the Twins tied it up, I thought there's no way that they're even getting to extra innings here. And sure enough, Tyler Freeman's out, but then Jimenez walks. Ramirez is out, but then a wild pitch gets Jimenez into scoring position, and you can just kind of feel, by the way, they almost had him picked off too on that play, which would have changed the complexion of that inning. And then Naylor's intentionally walked, and then Will Brennan on the first pitch hits a 3-run homer to right just over the fence, and so Guardians win. And that was indicative to me of how this entire series went, where the Twins just didn't have it.
It was sad, Dan. It was sad. That's the moral of the story. Let's keep moving here. Maurer's musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Maurer's musings.
So I was reading about this. I think this was after game one or game two. Carlos Correa was asked, and so was Rocco Baldelli, asked kind of their thoughts about robo-umps. And Carlos Correa's idea was to put a pitch comm in the umpire's ear as well, so that the umpire knows what pitch is coming. Because Correa is saying, essentially, if the umps knew that information, that would make it easier to make these calls. And then Rocco was just all about supporting a robo-ump, not because he doesn't like umpires, but because their job is complicated enough that he thinks, let's just take this off their plate. And I'm curious for your thoughts on those ideas.
The more I've thought about this, Dan, I am for the electronic strike zone, and I actually hated this whole, like, batters can challenge bad calls, if they want, but it's not like every pitch is a robo-ump call. I'm more okay with that now. I've settled a little bit. I do still sort of think it's a half measure, but at the very least, it gives the team an option when a call is absolutely egregious, especially in big moments, to do something about it. I am worried about the speed of the game. If each at bat, or each game, each batter gets a call that they can make back to the robo ump. That's why I think sort of for the speed of the game, the ump should be told whether it's a ball or a strike. Correa's idea, I actually think it's a bit dangerous in that it's gonna immediately place a bias upon the umpire because he knows what the pitch is. And I think that it can sort of skew how the ump views the pitch because he knows what's coming. It's something different when you're watching the ball blind. You're supposed to be objectively looking at the zone. And I think to have that data coming in, an additional objective factor, is going to impact your subjective ruling in how that ball crosses the plate. So I don't really love Correa's idea here because I think that, again, it's going to put some bias in the mind of the umpires knowing what pitch is coming and what the pitcher is trying to do.
What do you mean subjective? Isn't it either a strike or it's not a strike?
Well, I think, Dan, we're way past the idea that balls and strikes are objective at this point. Anytime you have umps calling it, that's what I'm saying. It is a subjective decision, and that's why robo-umping, I think, again, one of the reasons why I'm not as on board is because I want to see exactly the zone that's drawn up for each individual player to see like how that zone is set. But you can't argue that balls and strikes are objective calls currently in the current world, Dan.
No, I agree with you there. Maybe people will start hiking their pants up, or something like that, or like wearing their jerseys high or something like that. We'll see some interesting wardrobe decisions, I think, whenever the robo-ump comes up. Anyway, what's yours?
Oh, I didn't even know I hadn't given mine.
Yeah, you had one in here too. Yeah.
Do you remember a time, Dan, when the Twins offense was so hot and so cold? Like with the Yankees, you could sort of be like, okay, yes, the Yankees have very good pitching. The Twins offense hasn't been great, but it's sort of been better as of late. But then, Dan, when you go up against the Guardians and things aren't going so well, it starts to feel a little bit more like last year, Dan. 24 strikeouts in this series. That just felt like a lot, and a lot of opportunities, and even just a lack of opportunities, Dan, for this offense to put numbers up on the board.
I mean, I'm sure there's a time, we talk about this a lot, and that because it makes it sound like our memory is so long. I'm sure the Twins have had stretches like this, but it is a strange yo-yo effect of this baseball team. I do think it just comes back to the fact that when they play really good teams, they're not there yet. And maybe it'll be the return of Royce Lewis that will make a difference. Maybe it'll be the development of some younger players, but I just don't see this team right now competing with the Guardians. I mean, like, I don't know what it would take for them to do this. They're very mediocre because they have a lot of weaknesses right now.
The sad truth, Dan. With that, let's go into our series grades.
Series grades.
Gotta be an F, Dan. It's a big divisional series. I know it's early, but these games, Dan, they will matter down the stretch. And the offense didn't look good. The defense, I guess, looked fine. I mean, the pitching was terrible in game 2, clearly. In game 1 and game 3, they gave the offense a chance to win. And I realize that you could say, hey, Duran really dropped the ball here in game 1 and game 3. Doesn't really matter, Dan, if you're not putting up more than 2 runs.
Yeah, my math is also obviously going to add up to an F, but I'm going to get there mathematically. The advanced retreat is a 1 out of 10. This is a bad road sweep to a rival. What would have made this a 0 to me is if it was at home. This is just such a costly series in mid-May. It sets the course for, the next couple months here as the Twins will try to close that gap, not to mention the Royals are in the midst of them too. The batting, I gave a 2 out of 5 just with the lack of situational hitting. They did produce some runs, but in the game 2, it wasn't timely. The fielding, a 4 out of 5. I think moving Willie Castro out of center for most of the series. He did play center in game 3, was good getting Buxton back. And then pitching, I gave a 3 out of 5 because the bullpen was bad in game 1, but the ship was already sinking at that point. And Paddack's start was so good to give them some hope in game 3. But that all adds up to, 10 out of 25, which is 40%, which is an F.
It's a lot to take in, Dan. Anytime that you start explaining your grade, it's like I got to really focus here to make sure I don't,
Fall
drift
asleep?
off and think about other things.
Sorry, David.
All good here. So we should note here that outside of playing the Royals, after we'll play the Nationals here and then the Rangers, we see the Royals, and then we don't see another AL Central opponent, Dan, until the Tigers over July 4th.
Wow.
So it's a lot of other opponents here and a lot of bad teams. So we see the Rangers, obviously, who are good. The Astros, who I'm not really sure exactly what they are right now. They seem bad, but they could be good because they're the Astros. And then we see the Rays in the middle of June. But other than that, Dan, we see a lot of bad baseball. Oh, the Yankees, too. I didn't even want to think about the Yankees again, Dan. But we see the Pirates, the Rockies, the Athletics twice, the Diamondbacks, and then the Mariners, who we sort of had their number in the last outing against them. I think that the Twins can make up some ground during this stretch. And even if they can win a game or two against those higher profile teams, this team can really make some moves here in the standings.
I mean, they beat the bad teams. They lose to the good teams. I think that's how they are. Let's push forward here to our last couple segments. Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
So if you follow any MLB app at all, Dan, you probably got 30 notifications from Paul Skeens for the Pirates. He's this guy who everybody's talking about, this high-profile prospect, comes up. He's the first player now, Dan, in AL/NL history to toss 6 innings pitched with 10-plus strikeouts with 0 hits within his first 2 career starts. I don't understand, then, who's keeping track of these stats. Or, I just think that there's got to be something easier to say than all of those things. Because I would think once you come up with the 4th variable, Dan, I think that the stat has lost its meaning. If you need to go to the 4th variable to figure out that it's the first time somebody has done something, it no longer matters. Everybody has lost interest. It's like Dan's grading. Once he gets to the 4th category, we've all tuned out. It no longer applies in our minds.
Ogres are like onions. End of story.
There are other sounders, Dan. Why did I give you your own sounder board? My goodness.
Anyway, I will add a 5th variable. He had only 1 walk, too, so that wasn't too bad. I thought maybe he was going to have a few more of those free passes, but he didn't. And then I have one more note. So Jorge Lopez, the former Twin, former lots of teams now, has landed with the Mets, and he's actually in a really good spot right now. So, and I think this is cool for him. He's made 23 appearances. He's got 17 of those in which he hasn't allowed a run, which I think is pretty darn cool. Good to see him. His ERA on the season is down to 2.49. This is a great story because, yes, he struggled with the Twins, but I'm glad to see he's back on track and not in their same league.
He seems like a guy who it was more of a mental thing than a physical thing. He always had the stuff, but he just couldn't get himself right in the zone. And I think that, he could be a very good pitcher, and clearly he's shown that he can be for the Mets.
All right, one last segment here, Puckett's Picks.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
Twins head to Washington, Dan. They're going to see their old friends Eddie Rosario and Joey Gallo, so it should be a fun series to watch. Listeners are going to take Max Kepler. I'm going to take Correa, and then Hogs is going to take Miranda off the board. So it comes to you, Dan, with lots of good options still available. I mean, lots of options that seem reasonable given the state of the current team. Good is probably a strong word.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. Gosh, let's give me Byron Buxton. You know what? The feel-good comeback story continues.
Well, I mean, it would make sense that you would be the guy to pick him first back from from the IL. But with that, Dan, I think let's have you go ahead and send us out.
Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page and Instagram pages. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platforms so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we would greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon, link in the description. Thank you for listening. And as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.